Good morning. First of all, I just wanted to start with a few words before I pass things to Elizabeth. And what a pleasure to welcome you to this CAPLA event, a Futures Council event. Before I introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Podacek, a sincere thank you to Kendra, MLA 2015, for doing this presentation today as a kickoff to 2 days of discussions on building a changing world in the face of uncertainty. So let's unpack that a little bit. The uncertainty. I know you were all very familiar with uncertainty these days as we travel through these days of global pandemic. And we see the call to social justice in the nation and beyond. And we reflect, at least I know most people that I ever talk to, is that they're reflecting right now on what life will look like as we emerge from these days. And this is the purpose of this discussion today and tomorrow with the Futures Council. So to the Futures Council, for some of you on this call, you may not know it very well. But first, may I say a particular welcome to the members of the Futures Council who are joining this Zoom call today, and to Richard Johnson, a wonderful colleague from Rice University and a council member who has now stepped up as the chair of this council. So please find the bios for the Futures Council members on the CAPLA website, and you can acquaint yourself with these very impressive practitioners, academics, and industry leaders. So just briefly, the Futures Council is, as Dean, this is my advisory body. They provide a very important external perspective on the college. They help us network and make connections and raise the profile of this mighty college. And they engage in conversations, as we will see this morning. And building a changing world is the strategic vision for the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, and it has 5 parts to it. First, it's making CAPLA a leader in built environment innovation, and that makes us commit to creating a transformational learning environment, doing transformational research, and also embracing our land grant status in our service to community. And finally, very significantly for today, making CAPLA a leader in inclusive excellence. Before I introduce Elizabeth, a reminder of the event we're going to have tomorrow on Tuesday, October the 13th at 9 a.m. And this is a discussion which will be moderated by our Associate Dean Academic, Laura Hollengreen, you see here on the screen. And the topic will be the futures, in regards to the Futures Council, will be uncertain times, professional, academic, and community responses for CAPLA to consider. So let me just change up. I'm trying to find my introduction here. I'm just shuffling pages. So Elizabeth, it was wonderful actually to read more about you. Of course, as Dean, you know, I wish I had a much closer one-on-one contact with the students, and of course, it's very difficult in these times to be able to you know, bump into each other on the stairs, or see you in studio, or passing in our Sunt Gallery. But really, we could not have had a better person to moderate this session today than Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is a Master of Landscape Architecture student who came to CAPLA in the fall of 2019, and she has she has been a spectacular addition to this program. Elizabeth came to CAPLA with a strong interest in community-driven planning, a practice that she was first exposed to in doing her 2 years of service with the Peace Corps as an agricultural extension volunteer in a rural village in Cameroon, collaborating on a number of community projects related to public health, food security, and youth empowerment, and working directly with the people of the village who would be most impacted by the work. Elizabeth forged a deep commitment to ensuring that underserved populations are included in the planning and design of their own communities. Elizabeth is a Paul D. Coverdell Fellow here at the University of Arizona And Elizabeth's fellowship outreach position is with the Tucson Clean and Beautiful, a nonprofit organization working to preserve and improve our environment, conserve natural resources, and enhance the quality of life in the city of Tucson and eastern Pima County. Elizabeth also serves as a green infrastructure design scholar working with community groups and government partners to design and implement tree planting and water harvesting projects in public spaces. Elizabeth says that landscape architecture, and this is a woman after my own heart, being a landscape architect myself, presents the opportunity to improve social equality through practical, interdisciplinary solutions that foster public wellness and environmental resilience. So I'm very excited to present Elizabeth, to introduce today's speaker. And as I said, it appears they have a great deal in common. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Nancy, for the very generous introduction.
Not at all.
Very kind. Awesome. Well, I just want to start off by saying we're so excited to welcome our speaker this morning, Kendra Hyson. Kendra is a 2015 CAPLA Masters of Landscape Architecture graduate. Kendra actually admits to taking a leap of faith when she decided to enroll in the MLA program here at the U of A, but she credits Lori Johnson, the director of the School of Landscape Architecture, with enticing her to make the move from Washington DC to Tucson. So before CAPLA, Kendra studied sculpture and installation art at Spelman College, an all-women's historically Black college in Atlanta, graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts. Her interest in the environment was a result of an installation art project she created in Panama. And Kendra's cumulative interests and experiences began to align in the MLA program when she realized the power of community-based design and planning. So following her graduation from CAPLA, Kendra briefly worked for a private practice. She sought to further her interests in community engagement, layering the social and political implications of design into the built and natural environments. And she found this opportunity at the Neighborhood Design Center in Prince George's County, Maryland. In 2017, due in part to the honor of being named an Olmsted Scholar while at CAPLA, Kendra was appointed to serve on the board of directors at the Landscape Architecture Foundation. LAF, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit dedicated to creating a more sustainable, just, and resilient future through landscape architecture. Kendra says she's grateful for the opportunity to work with such devoted landscape architecture professionals while serving on the LAF board. Some of these fellow board members have become her colleagues, including the co-founder of the Urban Studio, Maze Hughes. So the Urban Studio is this amazing nonprofit founded in 2019. It's led by architects, landscape architects, and designers of color working to create equitable design and reverse historical systems affecting communities of color. At the Urban Studio, Kendra has been excited to engage with younger generations and expose them to the possibility of shaping their communities through becoming landscape architects, planners, and engineers. In addition to her exciting work with the Urban Studio, Kendra also works as a senior planner with Prince George's County Planning Department, serves on the Chesapeake Bay Conservation Partnership Steering Committee, and is active on various ASLA national committees. So throughout her extensive accomplishments, we can see Kendra is motivated to design with people, not just for people. And I'm very proud to introduce the CAPLA alumna, Kendra Hyson. Welcome, Kendra. We're so happy to have you here and sharing your experience on ensuring equity and building community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Such a great introduction. You guys make me sound so cool. I hope I live up to the hype. And so I'm going to share my screen in a moment and kind of take you through this process of creating the urban studio and how it is a reflection of just my experiences as a designer, as a African-American woman, as a CAPLA alum, and share with you little bits and pieces of myself along the way as I talk about what we do at the Urban Studio and what we're attempting to do. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see everything? All right. So equity, next generation landscape architects, new standard for design. Make sure I can click forward. So it's when we talk about equity, it's very important. It's especially actually when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's very important to define exactly what we mean by those terms. And so I really love these definitions of equity, inclusion, and access and diversity. I know it's a lot, you all won't be able to read through it, but I'm going to read the definition of equity that I think best fits the work that we do. Equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of a community. Equity requires commitment to strategic priorities, resources, respect, and civility, as well as ongoing action and assessment of progress towards achieving specified goals. This is Raven. She is an 18-year-old graduating senior, or she just recently graduated. She was a participant in the DC Student Construction Trades Foundation Academy of Construction and Design. She's a student leader, highly charismatic and creative, 3.3 GPA, and aspires to one day be an electrical engineer. This is the Chesapeake Bay, where both Raven and I live. If you all aren't familiar, we're on the East Coast, and the Chesapeake Bay is one of the largest estuaries in the United States, connecting to about 6 to 9 different states, and we are located right here in Washington, DC. The Bay is home to 18 million people and over 18 trillion gallons of stormwater, with the expectation of more people and increased urbanization in the region. And if we do not change how we develop urban areas now, we will continue to further degrade our watersheds and the environments that depend on it. And our world and profession as landscape architects will be threatened. However, seemingly small interventions at the sub-watershed level, the community level, can help change this fate. This is the Watts Branch Tributary. It's the longest tributary of the Anacostia River. If you don't know about the geography of DC, we're nestled between 2 rivers, the Anacostia and the Potomac. The Anacostia is the more neglected of the 2 rivers. And the DC Department of Energy and the Environment has targeted the Watts Branch subwatershed as one of the most polluted watersheds in the district. Watts Branch, Nash Run, Hickey Run, Oxen Run, Texas Avenue, Pope Branch, and Fort DuPont are all subwatersheds located east of the Anacostia River in DC. These target watersheds encompass almost 50% of wards 5, 7, and 8. And if I haven't told you yet, that's where I live, that's where I was raised, that's where I'm from. And it's no coincidence that these targeted watersheds are located in some of the poorest and Blackest communities in DC, the communities that I grew up in. You see, this watershed Raven and I inherited this watershed. We inherited the legacies of racial and economic inequality and disinvestment that have plagued our neighborhoods east of the river and are now threatening the overall quality of the bay where we live. Our environmental destinies are not just tied to our individual communities, but they're tied to our most vulnerable communities. Not just in DC, but in Tucson. We are all at risk for environmental degradation if we do not respond to our most vulnerable ecosystems and populations. The silver lining is that landscape architecture could dramatically improve Raven's life and the lives of the communities of color living in these targeted watersheds. Our profession needs the perspectives and experiences of students like Raven, or else we're putting landscape architecture and other allied professions at risk of extinction. So you might ask, why doesn't Raven want to be a landscape architect? Well, it's because to Raven, the benefits and possibilities of landscape architecture don't exist in her world, not in her community, not in her watershed, and until recently, not in the people she knows and sees. We as a profession are invisible to her. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. And that's a quote from The Invisible Man by Ralph Emerson. And it kind of sums up what we've done as a profession so far. And for so long, design professions have refused to see certain people. And it has refused to acknowledge the barriers to entry into the profession and barriers that make our work exclusionary as opposed to inclusionary from the people and communities who could benefit most from our expertise. The same barriers that Raven is currently facing could have very well kept me out of this profession. And so who am I? You heard a long list of things about who I am and what I do, but this is me on the screen. That's pretty much the essence of who I am since I was a kid. I'm a designer at my core. I'm a lifelong resident of Ward 7 and the District of Columbia. I'm passionate about community design and equity. I'm a champion for the environment, a graduate of Spelman College, an alum of the University of Arizona, a senior planner, and last but not least, I'm the co-founder of the Urban Studio, a nonprofit committed to equity throughout the design profession. And like I said, from this picture, you might think I've always wanted to be a landscape architect, but the profession was not made aware to me until around 2012 when I started doing some research in my postgraduate. After graduating with a degree in fine arts in the middle of an economic downturn and no one's really hiring you, I wanted to find a way to make my work meaningful, to let my ideas of self-expression and art really impact communities in a positive way. And so I sought out careers and I came across CAPLA. This is my CAPLA cohort, many of which I'm still friends with today, some of which may be on the line, I don't know, but this entry into the University of Arizona changed my trajectory as a professional. And I went there on a whim, and not even just a whim, but an opportunity that Lori McMillan Johnson offered me in 2012 to come to this place. I had no family, no friends, no reason to actually ever go to Tucson. And I figured if I get there and I don't like it, I can always leave and just start over. But I ended up loving it. And it has been such a formative part of my development as a landscape architect, as a designer. It has taught me to look at the world in such a different way than I was used to as a city slicker coming from the East Coast to the middle of the desert. It was very much an adjustment. I think Margaret can attest to my rosy red face after plant walks, and Ron can probably attest to my frustration with grading and drainage as I learned and fumbled my way through site analysis and all of these new programs and new perspectives. I learned that diversity doesn't just come in differences in racial or ethnic backgrounds. I met such a wonderful group of supportive fellow designers, and I don't think that my career as a landscape architect would be what it is today had it not been for the foundation that I got with CAPLA. But for a long time, landscape architecture has really only been reserved for the powerful and the privileged. And if you all believe, as I do, that landscape architecture and other allied design professions, planning, architecture, engineering, have the unique skills to be global change agents at the front lines of social reform and climate change, then we really must take an opportunity, the way that Lori did for me, to invest in the future of the profession. We must invest in the next generation of landscape architects and empower vulnerable communities of color to learn to design for themselves. You see, the next generation of designers needs to reflect the communities that need our services most. Students like Jelani and Quentin and Michaela and Raven, who can expand the narratives of our landscapes and reflect the diversity of experiences and ecosystems that make our world wonderful. And this investment goes beyond diversity. Diversity only asks who is at the table, who is in the room, and how many more of insert marginalized group do we have to have this year than last year. However, we need to look at this from an equity standpoint, and equity tends to ask who's trying to get into the room but can't, whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure, and what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here. And I think when I talk about equity and who is trying to get into the room. So I was trying to get into the room, and there was someone there who helped me get into the room, who let me in and then provided me with resources in order to continue down that path. Like I said, I come from one of the poorer, Blacker communities in the district, and there aren't a lot of opportunities for young Black people in this particular area. And the likelihood of us succeeding is not all, from a percentage standpoint, it's not that high, but we persist anyway. And having people who see your potential and see what you can possibly bring to an experience and open up resources for you is just so important. So we need to understand the why behind those who are not represented in our profession, if we really hope to develop innovative solutions to climate change. Because our next generation of designers will face a much different world than we've ever known. So we must prepare them to fill the void and to get them to ask the right questions. And those questions can be, what would happen if we taught communities of color how to design for their own neighborhoods? You know, I think as designers, we have this innate ability to project our ideas onto the world. And I think that's a blessing. And it's one of the things I love about being a designer and a landscape architect. But I think we hold too tightly to that skill, and it gives us an ego and a lack of openness with sharing our knowledge and sharing our insight and how we approach our work. And I think a lot of times we occasionally feel threatened by groups who come in and try to do the work that we do. One of the things about landscape architecture is the breadth of knowledge of landscape architects is unmatched. You know, no other profession has to consistently deal with fluctuating, changing living systems, respond to weather and climate and the ever shifting social systems that are going on, responding to politics, understanding policy and code, understanding building parameters and site constraints. There's a lot to unpack there as a landscape architect. Yet we find ourselves in this position where we're brought to the table last, which is kind of weird to me because we do have this vast knowledge set. And so we need to be more willing to share that knowledge with communities of color, because empowering them also empowers us, right? It shows the value of our work and our skills as designers. So the Urban Studio began to pilot a series of programs focused on supporting communities of color and marginalized groups and helping them to discover how they could impact the environment in which they live. The students and community programs in DC and South Central LA, where we also have a location, have begun to help strengthen the pipeline of students of color into the profession and help bring our skills to the communities that need them most. Our programs at this urban studio are focused on immersing young people in design, understanding new technologies, and how they can be powerful tools to aid us in our attempts to change the future. And they help bring our skills to the communities that need them most. And so for us at the Urban Studio, US is also our acronym, so it always works out really well. So for the Urban Studio, we have a set of values that we not only developed ourselves, but we cultivated with our students. We worked with our communities, with all of the groups we had been working with, and we developed these set of 5 values that guide the work that we do. And the first value is design is liberation. We want to give people the freedom to take their future into their own hands and use design as a tool to implement those things. We then want to elevate experts of lived experience, meaning the people who live in these communities are the experts of those places. We only bring an outside perspective, and we only bring our training to the situation. And so therefore we need to put the community on the same level that we put ourselves. As a planner in practice, I often hear the term stakeholder, and it makes me cringe, because when planners typically say stakeholders, and my apologies for generalizing, they are not often referring to the community, at least in the context that I've been working in. The first time I heard stakeholders in a planning setting refer to the developer was really problematic for me, because the developer is not the largest stakeholder in this community. The people who live there are the largest stakeholders in this community, yet they get asked to the table at the very last minute, and they get asked to the table only for a short amount of time. So we need to elevate those experts of lived experience, and we need to value their input, which ultimately results in this ability to co-design and co-create with the communities of color. We are illustrating to them that we have a set of skills that we believe can help. We feel that they have value in their expertise and their lived experience, and we come together to create multifaceted solutions. And we do that in a way that attempts to be authentic and meaningful, meaning we don't tokenize people, we don't place people, diverse groups, in a box. We continue to listen and remain open to what we're hearing and learning from the communities. And really taking a step back from superimposing our own ideas of what should be in these spaces to thinking about what could be in these spaces and how can we help the community get to that point. And a lot of times we do this through intergenerational mentorship and leadership. And although we started with young people and students, because in my mind, there's a quote by Frederick Douglass that speaks really highly to how I feel about this, which is, it is easier to build strong children than to fix broken men. And so it was kind of an easy starting point to begin with students, because these high school students, students between 16 and 20, are at a very critical point in their life where they're making a lot of fundamental decisions that are going to impact their trajectory. And a lot of them don't have guidance. A lot of them don't know about landscape architecture. A lot of them don't have support. They happen to be a part of this group that is actually heavily neglected in our spaces. We do not design for teens. We actually design to keep teens out of our spaces. And they're one of the most unwanted groups, unfortunately, because they don't have anything to do. And especially during COVID, they're definitely struggling right now. But they're at this pivotal moment where they're trying to assert their independence as well as make these life decisions, and it's scary, and they need people like us. I don't know where I cut out at, but it definitely destroyed my flow.
You were on a roll.
I know. I'm gonna go back to my screen.
Yeah, Kendra, I think you were right talking about designing for teens, about how they're having a hard time with COVID, and yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so essentially designing with these teens who are at these very pivotal moments in their career or in their lives, unbeknownst to them, they are making some really serious decisions about what they're going to do and what their life trajectory is. And this is the point where we want to reach them. And so our programs are focused, like I said, on immersing young people in design. And we have a mission to advance design thinking for equitable and sustainable urbanism, with a vision for the world to ensure all people have the means to create healthy, vibrant, and just communities. So I'll take you to DC again to discuss a little bit about our pilot program that the Urban Studio began, called the Studio DC Project. The project was located here in Washington, DC. As I mentioned before, we have two major rivers. This is the Anacostia River, and this one in the far, what is that, left corner of the picture is the Potomac. And the Anacostia divides the more, I'm gonna just say it, I don't think it was intended to be this way, but it worked out this way, the more affluent parts of the city from the poorer parts of the city. So Wards 7 and 8 are along this region and closer to the Maryland line. And so we got a $20,000 grant from the Department of Energy and the Environment. It was a 2019 Community Stormwater Solutions grant. And we wanted to teach students how to design for stormwater issues in their own community. So for this project, we took 10 students for 10 weeks to teach them about landscape architecture, the principles of urban planning and design, and to address some of the water quality issues in the very communities that we live in. We sent out notices to high school students of color in Wards 5, 7, and 8 to participate in a paid 10-week program. And paid is a very key phrase there, because we often, the ability to intern and volunteer for free is a privilege. And I don't often think we look at it that way, that if I have extra time and extra energy and extra resources, I can, for no money at all, help out another group. It's a beautiful idea, it's altruistic, and I love it. But for a teen living east of the river in a very low income neighborhood, an unpaid internship or any unpaid opportunity where I spend a significant amount of time is not the highest priority for me. And so therefore, a lot of our teens don't get to participate in programs that can develop them fundamentally around these topics of environment and design, because they don't offer opportunities that will provide them resources to keep doing this. Most of our students could otherwise be working during the times that we met with them. And the response we got was amazing. I mean, we got over 100 applications from students across the city. And I had to narrow down 100 applications to 10 students, which was very difficult. We went through a very extensive interview process with them, which I thought was very foundational in the students that we got into our program. We conducted a 90-minute interviews with with group interviews with 2 sets of students. And they got to basically do a run through of what it's like to conduct site analysis and look at bioretention and rainwater harvesting and all of those good things. And so providing these students of color in these communities, this kind of proved that these students are interested in this work and they want these types of opportunities for us to see so many applicants for our very first pilot program. And these students shared similar interests and experiences to myself as a teenager growing up in DC. So like I said, we took 10 students for 10 weeks. We had 2 studio assistants. We collaborated with Howard University's Department of Architecture and Engineering to get our 2 studio directed study students to talk through water quality issues, thinking about design thinking, landscape architecture, and green infrastructure. This is our 2019 cohort, and we finally settled on 12 young rock stars. There were so many talented people I couldn't turn away some of the students, so I went out and hustled for more money to pay them. And here they are. And the majority of our grant funding, we got $20,000. The vast majority of that money went to paying them for their time. They gave up 5 hours every Saturday for 10 weeks to participate in this program. And they each left with $50 every Saturday in cash, which was interesting to watch what teenagers do with $50 every Saturday. Some save them, some spend it all at the 7-Eleven. We don't know what they did with it, but some use it to pay graduation dues and things like that. But we did try to teach smart money habits along with this. So contrary to this photo, our students were very reserved and anxious about the process of learning these new skills, as well as being around people they didn't know very well for the first time. But as you can see, they became quite close after the 10 weeks, and they developed a camaraderie and support system for each of each other, which we all know is necessary as we embark on new things. And so this cohort situation is not much different than my first few months in Tucson. Like I said, learning grading and drainage. And the days outside where it was so hot and we were surveying the land. This is my very first plant materials walk 30 pounds ago before I got so much exercise thanks to Margaret. And then our grading and drainage, conducting spot elevations. One of my classmates described this day where we were on this concrete pad as feeling like a piece of bacon in a frying pan because we were sizzling. It was so hot. And I think this time taught me the value of shade. Shade doesn't have as much impact on the East Coast as it does on the West Coast. And I have now since created all of my routes around how much shade I get to experience to get to and from places. But again, the Studio DC cohort was very reminiscent of my own cohort, coming into a group of people you didn't really know that well, and then discovering that there's this wealth of diversity amongst them, and creating a camaraderie that supported me throughout my trajectory in this program. And I don't think I would have gotten through the program had it not been for my amazing cohort. Like I said, we had 2 directed study students. We partnered with Howard University, and we created a directed study course where the students got college credit for assisting with the programs in a way to continue the exchange of knowledge. So it's this idea that we are supporting students of color at every phase of their career as designers, from the entry into the profession with our design immersion programs, to supporting them with internship opportunities at the Urban Studio, opportunities to mentor the next generation, and then be mentored by us as well, and then helping to funnel them into professional jobs once they are done with our programs. Working, and sorry, I'm gonna go back a little bit. And working with college students and high school students, like I said, helped us to build this pipeline. And it allowed students to see themselves represented throughout all levels of the profession. Many of our students didn't know landscape architecture existed, let alone that there were Black women who did it, and let alone 2 Black women who run a program around it. That was rather rare. And specifically working with HBCUs like Howard was really important to us because historically Black colleges are a primary entry point for many Black students into higher education. But out of the 100+ historically Black colleges across the country, only 2 have landscape architecture programs. One is a BLA program and one is an MLA program. That MLA program has no teachers or professors of color, and actually currently no students of color in the program. It's interesting that at a historically Black college, there are no students of color in their landscape architecture program. There are about 7 architecture programs across HBCUs. That might be less now, and then 4 planning programs. And this is not just indicative of the barriers of Blacks into the profession. This is also a reflection of the loss in landscape architecture programs we've seen across the country. And with the global pandemic, we are losing even more students due to the challenges of COVID-19 and bandwidth issues, as you can see. But one thing that I have taken with me from my experiences, from my time in undergrad, to my time working in a small village in Portobello, to my graduate schooling and my thesis work, my professional experiences, the greatest moments of growth for me were when I was able to co-create my learning environments and with my community of people. And these experiences working and learning alongside those people have opened me up to the possibilities of what collaboration with different groups can do. So I turned this approach to this work into the urban studio and what we do in a similar way. These experiences are not only transactional, meaning that they don't just benefit the people involved, they're transformational. My experiences at CAPLA were transformational in how I approach my teaching with my students, how I approach my engagement with communities. I participated in Third Floor Studio. I did community-based projects while I was in school. I studied, Walter Hood and Claire Cooper Marcus, and got to meet Randy Hester and learn from these wonderful people. And then I was also a part of crafting what I wanted to get out of the program. As an MLA student, I think one of the best things about the program is that we each of us in the cohort had our own very unique and specific interests, and we were allowed to follow that interest. And we were allowed to take the foundations of education that we were given at CAPLA and funnel it into our specific interests and things we wanted to gain from working as landscape architects and designers. So we approach this work through transformational leadership and creating this set of values. So the way that I helped to craft my own education at CAPLA and at Spelman, I was working with our students to help craft their education, to develop what they believed were top-notch values and what they wanted to work towards in this particular program. And we did this through the lens of design thinking. This is my first job fresh out of school. And I don't know if you can tell from this picture, but I hated it. It was not what I wanted to do. I think it gave me an amazing foundation as a designer and to be able to produce construction documents and things like that. But I didn't feel like I was affecting any real change. And that was kind of wearing on my spirit. I was also I was the only Black person at my firm. In both instances, when I first started as a landscape architect, my very first job, I was the only woman, the youngest, and the only person of color in my office, which innately is not an issue because I find myself to be relatively relatable and I can get along with most people. However, it does pose challenges as you don't have anybody you can't be what you can't see. And so if you don't have anyone to go to talk through some of the things you're experiencing or some of the challenges you have, it wears on you emotionally and it becomes discouraging at times. And that's the last thing we want. So during my first 2 private practice work experiences, like I said, I was the only person of color. And of course we connected over landscape architecture, but that's kind of where it stopped. And I'm so grateful for those experiences and those people that I got to meet, but how much more could I've gotten out of these experiences if I had someone in my corner who shared my experiences, who knew what I was going through, who I could talk to, who I could lean on, the way that I was able to do in my programs for school. And so the way we kind of approach all of this is through design thinking. And then we ultimately resulted in this learning process for the students where we kind of broke down this idea of empathizing and looking at understanding what people are experiencing in spaces, understanding what is happening in our watersheds. And sorry, I was just trying to do a time check. Okay. Yes, understanding what people are doing in their watershed and opening them up to talking to people and finding out more about what's happening in the spaces that they lived. And the confidence, this confidence that you have to have in order to be a part of the design professions, I think we underestimate how much that is necessary in your success as a professional. Like I said, you know, working in these environments where I was one of very few people of color, one of very few women, it's hard to cultivate confidence just on your own internally without having a support system. And so, as we all know from desk crits and you know, capstone projects and theses, we have to get up there and defend our work, and we have to talk about our work. And we have to sometimes be crushed by the opinions of other people of our work. And that you need a lot of confidence and support to do that. And I wanted to make sure to provide that to my students. And so we set out to really understand how these young people experience the world. And like I said, we taught them to first empathize, teaching them to channel these thoughts and ideas and feelings that they had about the built environment into something great that they could be proud of. And then there's the secondary benefit of, you know, improving their community. We taught them to define their problems, to conduct site analysis, historic research. We taught the students scale, section, plan, perspective, all the principles of urban planning and green infrastructure. We talked to them about gentrification and displacement. A lot of them equated gentrification in our communities to a Harris Teeter popping up in their neighborhood. And so to hear those kind of perspectives, or to see a change in racial demographics, is what they constituted as gentrification in their minds, which is not super far off, but we had to kind of rework that ideology just a little bit. But the process was really fulfilling to hear what they had to say about their environments and to see how they transitioned that into their projects and into their work. Teaching scale to high school students is also not the easiest thing to do. I don't even know if I fully got scale until maybe my second year in graduate school. And then understanding plan and section and perspective, all of this in 10 weeks. So imagine like a 3-year MLA program jammed into 10 weeks at a high school level. It's a lot of learning. It's a huge influx of information, but they rose to the occasion. Like I said, we conducted site analysis. We went out and talked to the community. We had some really interesting experiences in our community, and the communities we worked in were the ones that we all lived in and we all grew up in. And many of these students lived around the corner or walked to our studio every day on Saturdays. And that gave them an opportunity to see, you know, what was happening in their community on a regular basis, to talk to groups who might have experienced these spaces in a different way, and to really come up with some really innovative solutions to these stormwater issues that their communities were facing. And so we showed them how to combine these findings into comprehensive designs that address the environment and social needs of the spaces. We explored other projects that had already been put into work and some of the ideas that were used to make these projects possible. And this was a part of the immersion process. We took them all across DC. We got on the metro with them. We went down, this is a photo of us at the Navy Yard, where we're talking about.
Let's hope that she can get back to us here so we can do some questions and answers. In the meantime, does anyone have any initial observations or questions we can queue up for Kendra?
I'm sorry.
There she is. There she is. Good.
So I'm gonna finish the presentation. Well, I just wanted to, the last thing I'm gonna do is just share a clip from the students' final presentation, and then we can move on to questions because we're at 1 o'clock and I'm almost through my presentation. Sorry if I've been a little long-winded and kind of got cut off at portions, but
you're enthusiastic. It's wonderful. So just a few minutes, if you could show us the clip, that would be great.
Yeah, let me get that up. Okay, let me see how this will go. Please.
Let me know if you can hear my video.
We have inherited communities that are more populated, more polluted than other parts of the city. Some pollution, like litter and smog, we can't see. Others are harder to notice. But how often do we stop and think, where does it go? And what are the consequences that are to come? Because we do not think about this, we put our friends, families, and communities at risk. I'm Donovan.
Brazen. Michaela.
Adrian. Azizi. Quincy.
Michelle. Alma. Ajanet. Jasmine.
Kai. Jelani.
And we are
Studio DC.
So that was their final presentation that they gave at the National Building Museum. The National Building Museum in DC was also a partner of ours in this project. They presented alongside students from the Design Apprenticeship Program, which is a design build program run by the National Building Museum. We had donations and support from Inova Site Furnishings, from Smith Group JJR, Howard University, Landscape Architecture Foundation, of course, the Department of Energy and the Environment, and I feel like and our caterer, B-Lin Catering, we were able to feed the kids every Saturday, so they didn't have to go and spend their money on food every weekend. So that whole entire process, this process of founding the Urban Studio, I mean, I've had this idea for a very long time. I went back to my original application or essay I submitted for the Olmsted Scholars and realized that I had wrote about this program when I was an Olmsted Scholar, and to be able to see things come into fruition and come full circle is really powerful, especially during a time when so many people are going through hardship and experiencing loss and struggle. I'm really blessed to be in a position with the Urban Studio to be impacting change, to be working with young people, and to be pursuing my passion. It does wear me out a little bit because it's 2 full-time jobs essentially, but it's a labor of love, and I'm so grateful to CAPLA for giving me the support and foundation to go out and do this type of work. So thank you all for bearing with me through my internet connectivity issues and my rambling, and I'm open up to any questions you have.
Wow. Great presentation. I'm sure we'll have a few questions. So I think how we were going to do it is if you can raise your hand, and then I will look at the list and call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and ask Kendra your question. Yeah. So, yes.
Lori has a question, I think.
Lori has a question. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Lori.
should I go? Yeah. Kendra, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I'm really inspired. And the question I have, is about that whole idea of letting people in, in other words, how do we find, you're doing it. You are doing it for sure. But how do we get these young folks into our programs, into our, particularly CAPLA, we would love to get them into. So how do we create that pipeline? I know you thought about this a lot.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different steps, and I think different organizations are doing it in different ways. So for example, ASLA is focusing on K through 12, right? They are looking at middle school education. Middle school is kind of that entry point for where you're sparking a lot of that interest among students. Particularly, we work, like I said, with a group 16 to 20 students who are in transition between high school and college, because that's a very pivotal point where they're making influential decisions. And also it's about removing barriers, right? So our professions, architecture, landscape architecture, design, all those things, they are not cheap professions to get into. There's a lot of supplemental cost with your education. And sometimes for many people, that cost doesn't outweigh the benefit or doesn't justify the benefit. The way, like, if you graduate as a doctor and you come out making X amount of money, whereas like we're not coming out making these significant numbers, but we have this opportunity to shape the world, right? And so that's the idea that I'm selling to students, because that's the idea that I believe in, which is that if you understand the urban fabric, if you understand the systems you're working in, you can work to change it. You can find those pressure points where you want to impact the most change. And like I said, we don't, especially for students of color, Latinx and African-American students who are kind of limited in our population, their knowledge of the existence of landscape architecture and things like that is limited. So it's really about raising awareness about landscape architecture, getting out into the communities and showing them what we do and why what we do is valuable, beyond like telling people what plant is what in their garden. You know, I think people kind of put us in this box that is limiting to the scope of work that we do. And then also, I didn't get to say this, but the California trip that we went on as first years was so influential. And that was a huge model for me in Studio DC, was to take students to places to show them this is landscape architecture. This is what these things do. We impact lives, you know? And so those are some of the things I think you can do to start to engage more groups and get more people involved. But I will say, I was a teaching assistant. I was your teaching assistant. That was super helpful for me in terms of continuing to pursue my career, as well as gaining a deeper understanding of education and teaching, and just making those opportunities available, and then having support systems for those students when they come into your spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a BLA, Kendra, so send them to us.
Oh yes, okay, I will totally send them out there. I mean,
yeah,
I love sending city kids to the desert. It's a huge shock for them.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I believe we had questions from Barbara, Billy, and Laura. I'm not sure what order, but and Richard. So we'll try to get everyone in. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Kendra, wonderful presentation, and thank you for the example and metaphor of the estuaries. I thought that was super effective and really helped with the introduction and the understanding. And forgive my cat in the background, he was complaining mightily right now.
It's no problem. I have a dog who's snoring somewhere around here. So.
The question I wanted to ask was one of the questions that you actually brought up later in the presentation, which is when we have some of our more courageous landscape architects and designers that go into environments where they are more diverse, and they are creating the diverse environment for that firm, but they feel uncomfortable. What can we tell leaders of firms that are seeking to create diversity about how to make those professionals welcome, how they can talk to them about how important they are to not only the demographic diversity, but also the intellectual diversity of that firm, and so that they can keep those professionals and continue to grow that.
Yeah, that's a great question, because we do have a significant drop-off rate for people of color actually practicing landscape architecture. So there are a lot of us who have studied and been trained, but when it comes to practice, the way the field has been set up has not necessarily been conducive to the growth of people of color in these professional roles. And so one of the first things I say to people is well, cultural competency is a thing, and you have to understand where you may not have the same perspective as someone else. It doesn't mean that their perspective is wrong or that yours is wrong or theirs is right. It's just different. We've had different experiences, man to woman, Black person to white person. We have had different life experiences, and understanding that and having a level of grace and humanity with acknowledging like where you don't know something, right? Like, I don't understand that experience. Help me understand. That's a big question that I don't think, we all sort of like, okay, I'll give you an example. In my very first job in private practice, it was evident to all of us, including my project managers and myself, that I was not happy. And now I wasn't obviously irate and just, my work wasn't coming along as well as it could have. And no one ever stopped to ask me, like, is something going on? Is there something we can do to support you? It was just kind of like this assumption that that's where my skill level stopped, right? That, oh, maybe she's just not skilled enough to do this. And that's often not the case. It's a lot of times there's an emotional labor that you're dealing with in these workplaces. So I really encourage people to, number one, despite whatever privileges you might experience, whether from your gender or your race or your economic background, acknowledge that privilege and don't let it make you feel bad, don't let it interfere with you being able to show up authentically. Because when you show up authentically as who you are and your life experiences, it's easier for someone else to be vulnerable and let you know, like, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm going through, this is where I need help. Also hiring in their HR department, taking diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. On the Landscape Architecture Foundation board, we did a 2-day training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, as I think I'm one of four or five African Americans on the LAF board, I immediately thought, what is anybody going to teach me about equity and inclusion? But I learned a lot in that session about just all the different ways our experiences show up in our workplace, in our professional lives. And we try to draw such a hard line between this is professional and this is, who I am outside of that. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by not remaining like vulnerable and authentic. And so it's really, for me, with firms, it's about hiring people of color that can support your existing staff of color, more leadership roles for people of color, decision-making roles. It's one thing to have a lot of entry-level diverse staff, but it's another thing for your entire board of directors or your firm leadership to all be, to be of one mind, one type of experience. So that's a big thing. And mentorship. I can't tell you how important it is to have a mentor and someone you can go to. When I was in school, I went to LA Bash at the University of Wisconsin with the very specific goal of meeting Kona Gray from EDSA to have him be on my master's report committee. And that relationship, because the worst he could do was say no, right? All I could do was ask, and the worst he could do was say no, and I'd be back where I started. But he said yes, and he's been an advocate of mine and a supporter of my work. A fellow LAF board member now, and those relationships go a long way towards support. And even though like we might differ on a racial level or experience level, I think my professors at CAPLA it was very familial. Like being at CAPLA in the MLA program, felt very much like a family. We had dinner. I had Thanksgiving at my professor's house. I had dinner at their houses, and this relationship you build with them outside of just landscape architecture was really helpful in supporting that. So long story short, it's really like mentorship, representation, and leadership. It all kind of boils down to that.
Wonderful. I think the next question in order was Billy Faircloth.
Yeah, Kendra, hi. Thank you so much for that presentation. You covered a huge range of subjects, from how do you give real agency, design agency to students, to a whole range of issues about how we understand and work with communities. I grew up in Charles County, Maryland.
Yeah.
So when you started talking, just like evoking this landscape was deeply resonant with me. I am just curious. I'm wondering, now that you reflect, so you went back to the community that you knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, when you reflect upon this experience and your goals there, I have two questions for you. First, can you reflect upon ways in which you shaped the agency of your students in a way to see their relationships to their community differently? So in other words, did they see the power relationships with their community change because of the work that they did? Does that make sense at all, what I'm saying? Because there's community leaders, people dealing with this. There's a whole range of governance overlay on the things that you were just talking and I'm discussing. I'm just wondering, did the power relationships in the community change? And then the second question I have for you, if you were to go back, the next time you go into a community that's not your own, what are some of the things that you would do immediately?
So the first question in terms of did we actually give the students agency? Did they feel like they had agency once they went through the program, or did we experience like the community's shift? I will give you a little short anecdote. The first day we went out to do site analysis on our site. We went out to do site analysis. The neighborhood we were working in, the students called it the trap, which is another word for like an area where they sell drugs, and there are a lot of like loitering, lots of things going on that is not probably legal. And I was like, well, guys, we're from here. It's okay. Like, it's daytime. It's like 10 a.m. No one's, trapping at 10 a.m. Are they really? Like, are they really out? And they were. And we got out there, and I sort of misjudged what was going to happen. And we had some people to express, we were taking photos, doing typical site analysis, like walking around. And there were a group of gentlemen, and they mentioned to us, we rob kids. And I was kind of just thrown off for a minute, and first asked, is that something you're proud of? But after that, I was like, oh, we're not taking pictures of you. We're just here exploring the site. We're from the school next door. I just kind of gave them a quick overview of who we were. And then I kept walking because I have to worry about the safety of my students. If it was me and other adults, it would have been a different scenario, but I couldn't put my students in that kind of situation to have any deeper conversations with the people on site. But then we came back the next Saturday, and they're like, oh, you guys are the kids from the school. And it was a warm welcome. It was a completely different situation. And I think by like maybe saying, hey, we're from this neighborhood. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you cut out for a sec.
Sorry. Being in those situations and introducing yourself, number one, and saying, hey, this is who I am. This is why I'm here. Going into those situations with people who are from those places. Like, I would never want to go into a new community without a connection in that community, whether that be a community leader, maybe the planner for that area, even though they're not living there. That's always helpful in that process. And the first step is listening. That's the biggest thing is listening and saying, verbally articulating that power shift. Like, a lot of times I will say to community member, they'll say to me a lot, like, oh, you're the expert. We want to know what you have to say. And I'm like, no. I'm the expert in stormwater. I'm not the expert in this situation. So you're the expert. Me giving them that power back, I think changes the relationship for people a lot of times. I think that community members often think, oh, I don't have this title, or I don't have this, training, so I don't have the ability to make change or to do anything. And it's like, no, you do. Like, you just need someone who does have that training to kind of tell you, like, here's how it typically goes, and help to formulate those solutions for those communities. So those are my kind of first initial responses to that question, is just like, again, it's about showing up authentically, about acknowledging where you don't have experience. You say, like, I don't know this area, tell me more. Like, that's a big thing. And we're really, as humans, we don't like to admit when we don't know something. And that's a big first step, is just saying, I don't know, and I want to know. I want to learn more.
Awesome. Really, yeah, learning a lot. This is great. I think we have time for one more question. It looks like, Laura, I saw you have your hand raised. Laura Hollengreen.
Yeah. Hi, Kendra. Thanks so much for an inspiring talk. Among the values that you laid out, one that really got my attention, because I've thought about it in my own life in various ways, was about intergenerational mentorship and leadership. And I think that's a really great point. So I have a question that maybe follows on some of the other questions, maybe to think about a micro generation. And what I'm wondering is whether you foresee having the students who've been part of your program in the past, kind of the alumni of the program, be peer mentors to others coming along. Do you see the possibility for those ongoing relationships within the program? And I'm just sort of curious how you would organize that.
Yeah, that's like a key point in what how we approach intergenerational leadership and mentorship. Jelani Bird is one of the Studio DC participants, and he's now on our board of directors. Yeah. So we have implemented students' values and input from the beginning, so that this Jelani being on the board is an opportunity for us to help him, mentor him, and give him guidance. It's an opportunity for him to participate in future studio projects or design immersions as a instructor or mentor, because the idea is that this knowledge just gets passed down and turned over, which is why we had the directed study students from Howard, because we realized, I feel like I'm relatively hip and in tune with, popular culture and what's going on, but I'm also not 18. And so to have the college students provide a bit of a buffer in terms of our experiences was really helpful. And then we also were able to provide mentorship to them. And then I also think through this, like, how mentorship happens from a number of generations, right? I often go into communities with a lot of seniors, and I feel like I always have something to learn from them, and I'm always very optimistic and open-minded to what they tell me. And then providing opportunities for other generations to connect, right? So for example, within I'm working on a master plan project right now. One of the ideas around engagement I had was we were dealing with a large Hispanic population, and there's a lot of multi-generational living. So the grandparents tend to live at home with the family and the kids. And so we thought, like, what a way to get the grandparents and the kids to the event, where we give the kids community service hours and tell them to bring their grandparents who may not know how to use Zoom or access all this stuff, and they can help them, right? And so now we're kind of exchanging even more information and even more values, and it's just about finding those opportunities where you can exchange knowledge and exchange power, and being willing to relinquish that power, right? We have to be willing to let go of our egos as designers. We will always be great at projecting our ideas onto the world because that's what we do, that's what we love. But sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes someone else has an idea that's just as great, or might not be in line with you were thinking, but it might be a better outcome because it fits better for this space. We have to stop doing a one size fits all for all spaces and really commit to the values of what was happening on that micro level. So yeah, we take this. The students will eventually mentor other students. They can participate in other programs. We're working with Virginia Tech, Utah State, NC State to develop our next set of immersion programs, so they can be the ones to help us to develop the curriculum. We can provide much support for their careers as undergraduates or graduate students, and then they can provide information to the high school students. And it's all, again, like I said, you can't be what you can't see. So when high school students get to see college students and interact, there's always opportunity there. And so yeah, that would be my response to that question. Or that is my response to that question.
Thank you so much. Very
No
interesting.
problem. Margaret! I saw your hand up.
I know, it was like quick. I just wanted to reflect on your approach that you've always had, and that's why not. You've always just said, I'm just going to give it a whirl, see what happens. I always think about the time you approached the conference in Los Angeles, I believe it was a city conference, and said, hey, would you be willing to give a pass to some students to attend and for free? And they said, sure. I'm trying to remember, was it you and Mallory?
Yeah, it was myself and my friend Victoria, and it was a City Lab conference. That was like the first time I had learned about City Lab and Bloomberg philanthropies, and I just, on a whim, I was like, hey, I'm a MLA, can I come to this conference? And I got to meet the mayor of South Africa and Petersburg, Florida. That was.
Yeah. And I think, that we always try to pass on, no matter what it is, whatever your passion is, big or small, is, just give it a whirl, and you really embody that in terms of, well, I'm just going to try this and see what happens. And so it's a wonderful philosophy to have, is just to say, okay, maybe this is out of my comfort zone a little bit, but I'm going to give it a whirl. And I think that's something that we all try to really, try to emphasize to everybody, that we're all different in terms of what really, makes us, what gets us excited. And so I just really just wanted to reflect on that with you. And I just wanted to look at this little funny picture. This was a project that we did. This just popped up like on my phone, and it's just, and that's
because they're always listening.
and that was at Himmel Park when we were doing, inventory, and there were these irrigation boxes, and we're like, hey, let's do a little hopscotch. And I thought, that's the way, always looking at alternatives and how we think differently and how can we, so I just wanted to say it's really nice to see you, obviously, but also to reflect on that passion to always think out of the box and think, what else can we do here? So good job.
No, and I appreciate that you all gave me the space to do that. Because a lot of people don't get the space to do that and to go out on those limbs. you know, my significant other is a relatively measured and reserved man, and it throws him off all the time that I'm just like, hey, let's go just try this. You know, and he's like, I don't think so. So it does take being very brave and being very open to just being told no. And I think as a student, you really have to embrace that people want to help you because you're a student. Like, there's very few people that are going to tell a student no. And if they do tell you no, it's more just like they don't respond to your email.
Yeah.
Totally fine. But at least you asked and put yourself out there. And I think that's a big step. So thank you for that so much. Sorry, I'm responding to people in the chat. I'm trying to like.
I know. I'm copying and pasting some of the comments for you, so you can see them later too.
I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So like, there's my email for the Urban Studio, and if anybody wants to get in contact with me, and then you can always visit the urbanstudio.org. We're always interested in collaborating with, you know, partnering with universities. I would love to partner with CAPLA at some point to get, especially because we do have programs in Los Angeles. We are working in Los Angeles and DC. So we're not only based in the district, we're based in California as well. So there's opportunities there. David De La Cruz leads our LA studio, I guess. And he's working on a lot of projects in East LA and around the LA River. And so engaging Latinx communities, which I think is a bigger thing in Tucson than it is here in the district. I mean, we still have large Latino community here, but even more so in Tucson.
Nancy, do you have anything you want to wrap up, or Elizabeth, in terms of, we can continue if people have time, but I know people probably have other engagements and commitments on Zoom.
First of all, I will pass to Elizabeth in her functions as and her role as moderator, but just I'll just slide in a very quick thank you very much, Kendra. Also, you give me history here because I've been here for 3 years, and you give me some history here that has resonated with me because I've felt the same things that you talk about this place, about Tucson, about CAPLA, and the camaraderie that I do see amongst the students, and the connection with faculty, which is really wonderful for you to articulate. So thank you for that. A near history lesson of only 5 years ago, but it really was wonderful to hear you speak, and so inspired by what you said. And yes, we definitely want to be talking to the Urban Studio in regards to connections. This was a wonderful introduction, and I thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy. It is great to see you in this role as the dean, and I'm excited for what CAPLA has to come.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Definitely, once this video is posted and recorded, we'll be sure to share it. And sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I know Irene had one, and so did Richard. But yeah, we'll just like Kendra said, reach out to her.
Yeah, if you wanted to ask the questions, I have a little time.
Okay.
Before my next meeting at 2.
At 2. Yeah.
If anyone has a few minutes and would like to stay on and talk with Kendra longer, we certainly can do that. But if you need to sign off and get on to your next thing, we certainly understand that as well. So I'll stay on, and anyone who wants to, we can talk with Kendra a little bit longer if you have just a few minutes, Kendra.
Yeah, I'm here.
Well,
great. Great.
Irene, I know you had a question. If you're still around.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, Kendra. So I'm Irene. I'm a second year Master of Landscape Architecture. I am super thankful for your presentation. I have a very similar story to your upbringing. So I'm a little nervous. I just want to say thank you. You've paved such a road of inspiration. And so I hope that I too can go back to my community that's predominantly Latin. And so very similar stories. I actually got a little teary when you were talking about, sorry.
No, take your time. It's tough.
It is very tough. I think when you said looking up to mentors that look and relate to you, it really resonates. And so that's one of the goals, is going back to the community so that people, students that look like me can look up to me. And so you've said it so perfect, and thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time, take a deep breath. It's all good. And I know those moments that feel, I speak very jovial right now, but some of those moments are really hard moments, and some of those moments are really heavy moments where you feel very alone and very isolated, and you're just really itching for someone to understand you and help give you guidance. And sometimes it's not always the people you think it's going to be that give you that support and that guidance, but they're there. And like I said, just never be afraid. The worst that somebody can tell you is no. And that doesn't really hurt. After you hear it a couple times, it doesn't hurt that bad anymore. But especially in the Latinx community and the African American community, we have to have that support of, and my a cohort member of mine, Jesus Alon, I remember we had a Zoom like happy hour with some of our CAPLA family. And I was telling Jesus Alon, I was like, you are one of my first Latino friends, and your experience trying to get citizenship in the United States really opened me up to another experience I had no idea about. Like, I had no idea about this struggle. When you're dealing with your own struggle, you just think that's the only struggle that exists. But there are a lot of different things happening in other people's lives. And I think one of the beautiful things about diversity is it makes us aware of what other people are going through, and then allows us to be more empathetic. So don't harbor that emotional stuff. Like, talk to your classmates, talk to your friends, and find a mentor that is going to be supportive in the ways that you need. And don't be afraid to like cut off a mentorship relationship either. Sometimes they just don't work. Sometimes it's like time schedule is just not working. It's not clicking. And that's okay. Like, we have to acknowledge that it's okay that, this didn't work out the way we thought it was, and we'll go on to the next thing. So, stay steadfast, Irene, and keep up the good work. And I'm here as a resource if you need anything.
Yeah, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. But yeah, thank you. It's very, very inspiring. And that's the reason why I came into this field, is reshaping my community back at home. Yeah. And so seeing your story, is I see myself, and thank you once again. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Richard.
Well, I want to thank Kendra for an amazing presentation. I'm really grateful for it. It was probably the best 90 minutes I have spent since at least the beginning of the pandemic. Because it's so hard to remember what life was like before.
A lot of stuff.
And thank you too for Irene for your comments a moment ago. That was really important and fantastic too. Kendra, there are two words that jumped out at me that you used a couple of times. One was co-creation, and the other was empathy. I can tell you in my undergraduate and professional experience as a civil engineer, those words often didn't intersect profession. In fact, probably never. when I was in graduate school and then in the urban planning profession, maybe just a wee little bit more, but I can well relate to the frustration that public engagement sessions were often really just, here's our final design. We're checking a box to say that we showed it to the public, but we don't care about your comments. I mean, that's how it truly was, because the power structures that were, making these decisions didn't really want input. And I'm hoping that's something that's going to fade over time. So I wanted to dive in a little bit further on this co-creation idea and get your personal experience on, you shared some of these already, but insights about what makes a successful co-creation process. And then also, if you don't mind, and you can say this generically, but oh, did we lose her?
Yeah, looks like we lost her.
Oh, I asked such a long question, I lost her.
Richard.
I'm sure she'll pop back on.
Hopefully she'll pop back up. And thank you guys for your patience. This is where we're living right now, and it's a challenge, but I'm so grateful to everyone for hanging in there and sticking through this, because I think Kendra has shared some really wonderful observations about her experiences, and then showing up authentically herself and just being who she is has been wonderful for all of us.
It was so amazing.
Let me ask her if she wants to try to get back. It may be
I'm
that.
sorry, I'm back.
Oh, there she is! Yay!
Richard, your question cut out at, I didn't get your question, but you were mentioning about the engagement process.
So Kendra, I'll try to make it really short this time. Your experiences on sort of the best co-creation practices on real projects, and then secondly, your thoughts about how to better bring notions of co-creation and empathy into design education.
So I won't take full credit on the empathy thing. I read a lot of Brene Brown. Her book Dare to Lead is a really big one for me in terms of just how to show up in brave spaces and how to be authentic, and that resonated with me a lot. And in the co-creation process, I think I have a lot of empathy's a tough thing, because I think it's not until you really acknowledge your own privilege where you can actually have empathy for others, because you acknowledge where you don't struggle with certain things and where you do struggle with certain things. And so I think that that's a big part of having more empathy. One of the grateful things about this new work setup, this work from home situation, is that we've had to extend a lot more grace to people with kids, with dogs, with cats, families. Like, we are in people's homes with them now, and we're realizing that, like, they are not just some machine that comes to work every day and creates 1,000 policies for this neighborhood. They're human beings, and by acknowledging that level of humanity in all people, I think we open up space for people to show up more authentically and be more vulnerable in those situations. It's about saying I don't know a lot of times, and not I don't know, like I don't know and I don't care, but I don't know and I want to know more. It's about curiosity, like remaining curious about people and their environment and their experiences. From a planning standpoint, engagement is hard from a government hierarchical standpoint. It is really difficult. Just like, I work in the public sector, and with all the existing structure and hierarchy and rules, it's much harder to accomplish those things, because you have a specific timeline that you're working in. You got to initiate this project. It's got to go to the board. It's got to go here. And so the time for engagement is super truncated. But working at the Neighborhood Design Center and working with the Urban Studio, we have tried to expand the timelines for engagement to allow for that authentic engagement to take place. And so that's a big thing. And it's about wanting to know. And I think it's about coming up with solutions that don't just benefit one particular stakeholder. Like having, I used to have this disdain for developers and now as a planner I've become more open and like, okay, I understand their perspective. I understand what they're trying to do. I understand how, sometimes our rules get in the way of them doing the innovative work that we want to see them do. And so it's this dance that you're constantly shifting and moving around. Like right now I'm doing a plan, and this is our first, like what I would consider multilingual plan, where everything has to be bilingual, right? Now that adds another layer of like, it takes weeks to get things reviewed already. Now add on, it has to be in Spanish. So we got to add another few weeks. And it just, so streamlining that process is something that we're still working on. But that co-design and co-creation, it just starts with asking questions and asking the right questions and saying, are we sure we don't want to invite these people to the table? Are we sure we want to go about it in this way? Are we sure that we got captured all the information that we need to capture? And just not being afraid to like pull those cards because it's going to slow down the project, I mean, like I said, the worst thing somebody can say is, no, we're not doing that. And it's like, okay, well, I tried. I put the hat in the ring. It's on record. I tried. And so, yeah, that probably is my best response to that.
And then you can at least say, well, city councilor so-and-so said not to get the input.
And then the community's like, okay, they said no, we don't want to vote for them again, right? So it's like this, it's the cycle, so we have to be willing to, again, be brave and ask those questions and do it in a respectful way. I think sometimes we get so caught up in our own personal beliefs and we forget that some people believe different things and it's okay that they believe different things. Just we have to have respect for how we each show up. So that's a big thing for me. So,
I mean, I'm 50 now, and I think to some extent I had been conditioned for years just based on my experience. Oh, well, this is the way it is. So, we don't gather that input. And I think one of the wonderful things about the younger generations is not only do they say that that's not right, but like, you better change that right now. It's which, I mean, the leadership is coming from the young often on this, which is great.
Yeah, they're calling us to the carpet. They, my students, called me out on things all the time, especially like when I put the wrong scale on the map. But, they become braver by working together, right? They feel like, okay, I can say something about this because there are other people in this room who are thinking similar things to me or who are sharing similar experiences. I think the vulnerability of our students was really something that took me by surprise, was that they came in and they forced us to have some really deep conversations. I mean, we're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois, and we're talking about gentrification and toxic masculinity. And I mean, these are coming from the 17-year-old students. I'm like, what are they teaching you all in school right now for you to be showing up here with all these questions and these concerns? And that's what made me understand the value of their input, is that they're looking at this world completely different than we are. They're probably really scared by it, to be perfectly honest, and they're trying to pretend like they're not, but they have a lot of questions. And if I can help them be less scared as they move through making those decisions, I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you, Kendra. I mean, my observation in the classroom has certainly been the same as well. There's a level of sophistication and conversation that it reminds me of a quote I saw on LinkedIn the other day about how everyone over the age of 45 needs a mentor under the age of 30.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree with that because I think honestly, Margaret and Lori have been an inspiration for me in this, because I feel like they get so much joy out of teaching and working with people, and I think it keeps them so jovial and young and like sharp. And I'm like, I want to be like that when I'm, you know, have finished practicing. I want to still be a part of the conversation and still hear about what's going on, and that those things are inspiring to me. So
yeah, can I just jump in real quick? Kendra, thank you so much. And you know what I wanted to say? At this, I want to work for you. I really do. I mean, you know, I've been asking you to come, you know, teach at the university for, you know, many years. Every year I ask you.
I'm trying to get out there.
Lori, you have a new mentor.
I do.
Yeah, we have to have lunches. I mean, Lori and I used to meet in her office, you know, when we were discussing the history and landscape architecture course, and we'd have just, you know, general conversations and things like that. And I just think all those little moments are wonderful to have. And I really wouldn't be here without the level of support that I received from my CAPLA family. I think my dad died like the first 2 weeks of the school, you know, and I was failing plant materials. I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna name this hackberry tree this week, but and the level of support that I got throughout the program really just set me up for a great foundation. So thank you so much. And I would love to have you come work for the Urban Studio, and I'd love to have anyone who's interested in working with us to come work with us. We're all about collaboration and pushing the boundaries of innovation and testing new ideas and models and, you know, all that jazz.
That would be fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kendra.
No problem.
Any final quick questions? I know you have to get to your meeting, Kendra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can wrap it up. Thank you so much. I know I'm, speaking not just for myself to say, like, that was really a great talk, and thanks for sharing your vulnerability and just, your whole experience. I know it was, it was great to hear. So thank you
so much. Yeah, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate being here, and I'm excited to see what CAPLA has to come in the future, right? You know, all the changes that are being made. I mean, not to mention the amazing studio space. I like dream about that space every day. I miss it so much. But thank you all for having me, and I look forward to next time I get to come to Tucson and we can all actually fellowship together. So I hope everyone stays safe and, you know, and healthy and stay in touch.